Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Forethought, a podcast series dedicated to raising awareness about mental health and well-being through lived experience stories. So today I'm joined by Vanessa Bowen from Fairy Wren Counselling to explore the concept of identity, sexuality, and the current LGBTQIA plus landscape. So Vanessa, thanks for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, Joel. Thank you for having me.
No worries. And I know that, you've done podcasts and things like this before. So being a bit of an expert, I'm very excited to get into this with you. You've got a very interesting kind of backstory to where you got to today. So I would love to start by sharing that with our listeners, so that they can kind of understand, where you're at now.
Yeah. So I studied psychology at university way back in 2007, which feels like a very long time ago. And then after university, I sort of took a little bit of a different career change. So I worked in allied health for quite some time as an office manager. And it was during COVID when we were all working from home, and I was talking to a lot of our participants over the phone and also supporting our staff during that time. That it really sparked something in me that I enjoyed listening to people's stories. I loved helping them to problem solve and support them. And that really harked back to my love of psychology. And I realized that I could put those two things together and become a counselor.
Nice.
Yeah,
I think that's very everyone sort of had these realizations during COVID. It seems like something clicked.
very much
This
so.
is my purpose now. Um, so I guess you're in Ballarat.
Mhm.
I just want to quickly just touch on one of the initiatives that you've got up and running at the moment, as well as your private practice. If you can kind of explain, I guess, what you're currently doing in Ballarat.
Yeah. So, in addition to running my private practice, which is mostly online counselling, I also do a weekly clinic every Friday from Q Hub, which is in central Ballarat, and that is counselling appointments open to members of the LGBTQIA plus community and their family and allies.
So amazing. And so it's basically a walk-in kind of system, right? So you can kind of show up on the Friday and anyone's welcome.
Yeah, exactly. If I've got an appointment available, you can come and see me.
That's fantastic. And just out
Yeah.
of curiosity, I guess, I'm going to ask a lot of questions in this space because something I'm not as aware as I should be about, I suppose. But when you're in those situations, do you find it's a lot of the time an entire family coming at once? Is it often an individual coming and then families? Like, how does it sort of unfold most of the time?
Yeah, most often I work with individuals rather than families. At this stage, I've never had a whole family come to counselling before, but on occasion, say a younger person might bring their parent with them for support, and the parent might sit in for the first session or two, and that's perfectly fine, but usually it's just one on one.
Awesome. No, it's such an amazing initiative, and I look forward to talking about that a little bit later. So when I was going through, I guess, your backstory and your website, I just noticed a very interesting item in there, which I'd love to unpack, which is around how these classic teen movies from the 90s and 2000s have really impacted our views of sexuality. And, we were
Yeah.
just talking about this before, and, the preamble warm up is like reflecting on some of those movies now, like they're very problematic when you rewatch them.
Yeah.
And so you did a podcast on this and you've written a book. So I would love to get your take and your thoughts on that kind of 90s 2000s movie era.
Yeah. So I'm a 90s kid. I grew up in the 90s and 2000s, and I love movies. I always have. And so last year I published a book called Apple Pies and Other Lies, and that book is a deep dive into the teen movies from that era and really looking critically at them and the ways that they shaped both my ideas about sex and sexuality and then just the broader the broader cultural impact that those films have had on our ideas around those subjects.
Yeah, so I guess in terms of how they did shape them, like I guess what are some of the key themes? If you haven't really thought about this before and you're listening and you're like, oh, I used to love these movies, like how
Yeah.
did it actually shape our thinking or like shape our idea of sexuality? It was positive, negative, both.
I think I hate to say it, but in a lot of ways negative or maybe skewed towards being really fearful.
Hmm.
And often sex and sexuality was painted as something really frightening or having really serious consequences, which of course it can have really serious consequences, and it's important for people to be well educated so that they can make good choices. But yeah, the fear factor is high. And just a lot of shame as well around those subjects.
Yeah, and I know that's changed a little bit more in, modern day films and, theater performances. Like I just went and saw Anne Juliet with my partner, and that was very like positive when it comes to, sexuality and these kinds of topics. So we've come a
Yeah,
long way. Do you think there's still kind of room for improvement in sort of the mainstream movie scene, or are you sort of like, as a professional, you're seeing a lot of change and we still have a bit more to go? What are your thoughts?
I think it's really fantastic. We're seeing the tide turning, and some of the representation that is in current films and television programs is just absolutely, it really does warm my heart because we're seeing not only more representation of people of a variety of sexualities, but really positive representation. So, in, say, the movies from the 90s and 2000s, if you had a character who was queer, probably their storyline was going to be that they were bullied or that something horrible happened to them. They probably didn't have a happy ending.
Hmm.
Whereas we're seeing shows like, say, Heartstopper and Schitt's Creek, where the queer characters are having these fantastic, beautiful storylines with very little strife. But yeah, I do think that we have a ways to go. I think there are some sort of segments of the rainbow community that aren't always included in representation, and specifically asexual people are very rarely seen on screen. I'd love to see more representation there, but I think we're on the right track. We're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, no, I'm as someone who's a cis white man, like I guess it's, whenever I'm asking these questions, it's just from a place of
Yeah,
understanding and trying to want to know more. And I think conversations like this are really important for educating people outside of the community as well to, be able to be more positive and welcoming and safe, create these safe places for everyone, because you can only do that if you actually understand.
absolutely.
And so I guess that would kind of be a little bit of another question for you is, like when it comes to, people outside of the community and education and awareness and that kind of thing, like, are you involved in anything in particular in that space, like maybe even in just your local community or?
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate. Ballarat has a really wonderful rainbow community and a very active rainbow community. And that gives me the opportunity to be quite visible and take part in lots of events and educational opportunities to help people learn more about different sexualities, building respectful relationships, pride in your identity and exploration. Like, we're really, really fortunate here to have all of these opportunities to really dig into it and shine a light on it.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
So I guess that's probably like the next question is, LGBTQIA plus affirming counseling. Like,
Mhm.
what is this? And I guess why is it so important?
Yeah, so LGBTQIA plus affirming counselling is when you have a counsellor who is educated about the issues that are commonly faced by people in the rainbow community, but also respects the autonomy of individual people. So isn't applying broad brush strokes. They're well educated and understanding, but they're also looking at the individual as a person. And the reason that that's so important is lots of reasons, but largely in the counselling and psychology field, there has been quite a negative history towards people who are not straight, where being homosexual, being transgender was seen as a mental illness and was treated as something that needed to be fixed. Whereas now it's really important to provide that affirming care so that when somebody comes to me who, say, for example, is transgender, but is coming to me with a relationship issue, that I'm not sitting here pointing at their gender and going, well, this is the problem, this is the cause. It's just, this is a piece of who you are as an individual. You're a complex individual, and that really doesn't have anything to do with the problem that we're here to work on, but you still deserve to be recognized and treated with respect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, I guess. And it comes to, and this is a little bit of a track to the side, but pronouns and that kind of development, and just like being working in tech my entire life, like just not having pronouns. It's always been Mister on things like passport applications and all of the stuff. Like it was so ingrained into society almost at every single touch point.
Yeah.
And so that's, I guess, coming back to sort of tying it back into the workplace and supporting people inside the workplace. If you have someone in your team who might be from the rainbow community or whatever, or just needs some support, is, I guess, that education of leaders and how to be supportive is, to your point, to say, it's like, it's not being like, oh, this is how you feel because of this issue. It's like, this is how you feel because you're a person just like everyone else.
Exactly. And the beauty as well of seeing a counsellor who is LGBTQIA plus affirming is, if you've got 1 or 2 sessions with them, that time is precious and you don't want to be spending it educating them. So if you sit down and you say to them, I'm, bisexual, non-binary, if they already know what those words mean, you're like 10 steps ahead. You're not wasting your time educating somebody about these important pieces of you as an individual.
Yeah. And I imagine that, I mean, just from my own experience talking with generally older people from, they are the ones who kind of generally will be less educated and informed around what these mean. And so that can be quite a challenge coming back to, families or workplaces or people from different, ethnic backgrounds. It's like, there's so many challenges there you have to face culturally, I guess, don't you?
Definitely, definitely. It's really heartening though, because I come across a lot of older people who, for a lot of them, a lot of these terms are new, but so many people are so eager to learn and they just want to do the right thing. They're interested, they're curious, and once they have the information, they're like, beauty, we can get the ball rolling on this, and it's all good. They really want to do the right thing.
Awesome. I guess actually we'll see how we go with this, because this wasn't in the notes from the session, but maybe if you're comfortable doing this, could you give us like a rundown of, the basic kind of letters and words for anyone who's listening to this who might not know? We'll just do the kind of 101 as an educational thing. Let's give that a crack.
So the letters in the acronym.
And and then just a few of the basic terms. So like, if you might be listening to this and you've never heard of this topic before, like there's a little crash course for you, I suppose.
Yeah, okay. So starting with the acronym, so we start with L, which is lesbian, G is gay, B is bisexual, T is transgender, Q is queer, I is intersex, and A is asexual. So I feel like lesbian and gay are fairly well known. So generally speaking, a lesbian is a person who identifies as a woman who is also attracted to women, and gay is usually a person who identifies as a man who is attracted to men. A bisexual person is somebody who is attracted to people of their own gender and people of other genders. And we also have pansexual people, so that's somebody who is attracted to people regardless of gender. Q is a kind of a catch-all term for, like, queer is a catch-all term for anybody who is not straight. Some people just use queer as shorthand when they don't, maybe they're still exploring their identity, maybe they haven't quite figured out their label, maybe a label isn't important to them. Transgender is somebody who their gender is different to the gender that they were assigned at birth. Intersex is a little more complicated. So that's somebody who does not have a clear set. They don't fit into a binary sex. So they have either primary or secondary sexual characteristics that don't fit into the neat male-female box.
Mm-hmm.
And asexual is somebody who doesn't experience sexual attraction.
Awesome. I think it's going to be that was put you on the spot, but obvious, you know your stuff, and hopefully that little rundown is useful for anyone who might be listening who might not be aware of what some of those mean. Because I think that's kind of one of the things, right? And coming back to growing up and being a young person and starting to experience things for yourself, like if you're listening to this and you are sort of on the fence about talking to someone about it, like how would you recommend that someone kind of takes that first step? Is it like important to have a, affirming counseling session with someone first if you're worried about maybe having a conversation with your friends or your parents or whatever? What would you kind of suggest as like a, hey, this is how you can start?
Yeah, I think that making an appointment with an affirming counsellor is a fantastic first step, because not only is a counsellor going to support you, they're going to listen to you and they're going to help you to figure out what's the best way forward for you. Sometimes it can be easier to share these really personal things with a counsellor because they have no skin in the game. You don't have to be worried about, am I going to upset them? Am I going to offend them? What's their opinion going to be of me, because counsellors are non-judgmental. And an affirming counsellor, you can feel really safe that you're not going to tell them anything that's going to be a hot button issue. It's just you're going to be accepted and supported.
Yeah. And I think, going to see a counselor for a lot of people can be hard just in standard situations, I guess, let
Yeah,
alone if you have these kind of complexities on top of it and, all of this other stuff, like it can be very daunting, I imagine. So it's good now that I understand what affirming counseling is, like you said, is like, I don't have to spend 2 sessions explaining these things. It's like, I think
yeah.
I'm this, and you're like, great, away we go.
And particularly, yeah. It's funny too that you mentioned the pandemic and like people having realizations during the pandemic, because I see so many older clients, so people that might be in their 30s, 40s, 50s, who are in well-established relationships, who have kind of had realizations during the pandemic that, oh, maybe I'm not actually straight after all. And that can be really scary because it, they've got a well-established relationship, they've got a family, and if they're exploring their identity, there's that added layer of, okay, well, what does this mean in the broader sense of this life that I've built for myself?
Yeah, that's so interesting, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
everyone sort of had the career, like, is this what I really, and then there's that other layer like that. That's, yeah,
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah. It seems to be a real common thread.
I guess, do you think that was just because we had so much time alone with our thoughts? Like, for a lot of people, it was probably the first time we were actually learnt how to be okay with ourselves in some way and kind of do that self like exploration.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, it was that combination of having an awful lot of time to think, and also, as dark as it sounds, because we were sort of looking at the world as we knew it and feeling a little bit of pressure as to, well, what's the world going to be like when we come out the other side of this? I feel like a lot of people lost patience for hiding things or putting things aside that they have never confronted before. And, if they're thinking, well, the world's going to be completely different, I don't know, I can't take anything for granted. Maybe it is time to look at this thing that I've been carrying around with me, but I've been too frightened to look too closely at it.
Yeah. And then I guess that coincides quite nicely with, obviously the rise of different kind of social media platforms and this positive culture around it, which kind of made information more accessible and celebrated and all of that. So you had this perfect kind of wave that was like, all right, let's actually take this first step because society seems to have come around finally.
Yeah. And with that representation too, seeing such a variety of people in media, on social media, there's this saying that you can't be what you can't see.
Mhm.
So it might be that you see somebody on social media or you see a character in a film and their experience reflects something in you. And you're like, oh, okay, there's actually a word for this thing that I was feeling. Or maybe there's a piece of me that I haven't looked closely at, but seeing it reflected back to you gives you a lens to be able to examine it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So I guess I guess from your point of view, like across the board, what are some of the biggest challenges that people face when it comes to exploring their sexuality or gender identity? Like,
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge and varied topic. I feel like a big one can be, as we said, choosing a label. So some people get really hung up on trying to pick the right word that fits them. And at the same time, there are some people who feel as though the label's not actually important, but they feel like they feel a pressure that they need to pick something, or people who have a label and an identity that they've really really held close, and then something changes and they realize maybe that didn't fit after all, and I need to make a change. I think coming out and expressing their identity to the people around them, whether that's friends and family or in the workplace, and also just tackling some of the stereotypes and negative cultural ideas that we have around certain identities, because that can be really, really challenging for some people.
Yeah, and I was going to say, from your point of view, like obviously we've done a lot. What's kind of happening in that space at the moment to try and, raise more awareness and break down those barriers, like at a national level even, or like, what are some of the key things in play at the moment?
I think that I look particularly at the transgender community because I feel like there's still a huge amount of hate being directed in their direction. And I think something that's really wonderful is seeing transgender people celebrated for their accomplishments and achievements and being held up as like these really wonderful, creative, capable people who are doing amazing things. And for like all transgender people, but especially children and teenagers who have role models and are able to see like, okay, this person has done amazing things and is really thriving.
Mm.
That's something I can do too.
Yeah, and that comes back to, I guess, that positivity in media and all of those kinds of different
Yeah.
things, which is really creating that safe environment for people to explore these things earlier, I imagine.
Absolutely. And there are also so many initiatives all over Australia, places like Q Hub where I'm working that provide affirming care of all different types. So I know that, for example, in Melbourne, there's a wonderful service that has what they call an affirmation station. So they run classes to teach people how to do hair and makeup. They teach trans men how to shave. They have clothing available and stylists that can help people choose clothing that makes them feel fantastic. They also have counselors and mental health support, peer support, like so many wonderful services popping up everywhere just to help people to feel included and supported.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Um, I guess kind of one of the last things I'd like to ask you is, I guess, coming back to this idea of, supporting people who might not be so used to the rainbow community. And it's sort of,
Yeah.
whether it's, parents or grandparents or your boss at work or whatever, if people in those groups want to try and learn more to support their, child or their employee or whatever it is like that, should they also look at coming to an affirming counseling session? Is that appropriate? Or like, what would you sort of suggest if I'm just worried about my staff member? They've mentioned something and I don't understand anything about this topic. I get a bit overwhelmed. Like, what would I do in that situation?
Yeah. Again, I think that coming and seeing an affirming counsellor can be a really great first step because oftentimes in my experience, people want to do the right thing and there's a lot of fear around messing up. And so we can have a chat and explore some of those fears. We can dig into some of the stereotypes and kind of myth bust some of them. And an affirming counsellor can also give you resources to go on and have more of a look at so that you can do a bit of research in your own time. There are also programs that run workplace training for workplaces that have either already have people in the rainbow community or want to make their workplace inclusive. So yeah, there's so many resources available to help people gain that education and support them through that process.
That's amazing. I have to get some of those off you and I can attach it to the speaker notes when I kind of publish this.
Yeah,
But I think that's really useful. And I can already think, like, the comment you just made there about people wanting to do the right thing, but being afraid to, for fear of saying the wrong thing or slipping up. And, even before, like, every time I see the acronym, I want to get it perfect every time because I'm like, I just want to do the right thing. And that's like,
yeah,
so it's like, it's a real thing. And people are often trying to understand. It's just hard for them to do. So it's good to know that they can come and see an affirming counselor too. There are resources out there if people do need help supporting somebody in this space or just learning more themselves. So
Yeah.
wonderful.
And I think the really important thing to highlight there is I think it's about progress, not perfection. So if you slip up sometimes, it's actually not that big a deal as long as you're trying. I think that's the important piece.
Okay, that makes me feel a
Yeah.
lot better. So I guess if anyone is interested in having a chat to you, whether it's about, affirming counseling or just any of the information or anything about, your drop-in clinic in Ballarat, like how do people get in touch with you?
Yep. So I have a Facebook account and also an Instagram account. I'm Fairy Wren Counselling on both of them. And you can also visit my website, which is at www.fairywrencounselling.com.
Awesome. And yeah, this will be posted in the ForMind platform as well. So you can actually go in and book a session with Vanessa in there if you're listening to this within the platform. So thank you so much for joining. That was a brilliant conversation. And I hope that people who are listening have taken something away from it. And I really appreciate you giving us some of your time today.
No worries. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.